His wife had been kidnapped, his newborn child taken, and many of his people were slaughtered. Temujin was furious, and so, as he sat in his mountain refuge, he plotted his revenge. The love of his life had been stolen by an enemy warband. He could only begin to imagine what they were doing to her. And when he eventually found out, his life would never be the same. This is the story of Genghis Khan's darkest day. He was only 15 years old, but the events that followed quickly made him a man. But shortly before his life plunged into chaos, he was enjoying life as a new husband. It was a sunny day in the steppes, and Temujin had just been married. He and his wife Borte were still teenagers, but they had a bright future ahead of them. For years, Temujin had wandered, lost. He and his small tribe, which consisted of his mother, his siblings, and a few others, had been through many hardships. From kidnapping to near starvation, it hadn't been easy. But now, he had a new family, and they welcomed him with open arms. Since immediate survival had been taken care of, Temujin's mind drifted towards thoughts of conquest and glory. But he was about to be rudely awakened. His troubles were not over yet. His world was about to be turned upside down. He awoke in the middle of the night and could sense something was wrong. He left his tent, where he and his family slept, and went outside. It was dawn. The sun was slowly creeping up above the mountains, and then he saw them. Shadows riding towards his camp. They were mere silhouettes against the rising sun, but he knew what it meant. They were under attack. He shouted a warning, and him and his small band of warriors prepared themselves. But it was too late. The riders were already upon them. His enemies ravaged the camp and started slaying whoever they could. However, this wasn't just a random raid for loot or plunder. There was a prize they were seeking. The raiders were from a tribe known as the Merkits, and they'd recently found out that their old enemy, Yasuge's son, had just been married. Temujin was that son. The Merkits held a deep grudge against Yasuge since he'd slain one of their warriors and stolen his wife. That wife was Temujin's mother. They now wanted her back, but they also wanted Borte. As the chaos ensued, Borte and her child were quickly captured. By some miracle, Temujin, his brothers and his mother, as well as some of his closest warriors, managed to escape. It was no easy decision to leave his wife behind. But Temujin was forever a strategist. He knew if he stood and fought, then he'd be dead and she was doomed. Tactically retreating was his only option. And thus, he and the survivors rode. They rode as fast as they could, leaving his wife and newborn son behind. Not knowing where to go, they rode towards the mountains and sought a temporary refuge. The Merkits had gotten what they wanted, so they didn't pursue. They probably should have. And so, Temujin and the survivors had found shelter in the Burkhan Koldun Mountains, which meant Temujin could start plotting his revenge. But first, he had to weep. He was absolutely devastated. His heart was broken. He screamed that his breast was torn apart. And in a way, it was. He had finally found a glimmer of hope in a life that had been so cruel to him, and it had been snatched away, snuffed out by the consequences of another man's actions. When he finally calmed down, he made plans to retrieve his wife. He had no idea what they were doing to her, and had to act fast. Meanwhile, Borte had been forced to marry the younger brother of the man whose wife Temujin's father stole. If the man was alive, it would have been him who married Borte, but since he had died, Mongol law stated that she must marry his younger brother. And so, for 8 months, she lived with her new husband while she eagerly awaited Temujin's return. Things like this weren't uncommon in the steppes, and Temujin could have easily found a new wife and let the whole thing go. but she knew he wouldn't. His pride wouldn't allow it. Hence his plans to get her back began, and to do so, he'd need the help of his two allies. But there was another challenge awaiting him, one he never could have foreseen. Genghis Khan is a man who has a lot of valuable traits. He was a talented, we can all agree on that, but I believe his greatest ability was that of foresight, or you could call it fortune, because no matter his predicament, he seemed to always find himself in the perfect situation to not only deal with problems, but also capitalize on them. Whilst most warlords and conquerors worried about battles and events of the near future, Temujin looked years ahead. To have befriended Togrul Khan, the most powerful man in Mongolia just before he'd needed his help, was nothing short of genius or supreme luck. Either way, Temujin left his mountain refuge and sought out Togrul. When Togrul learned of the disastrous attack by the Merkits, he immediately offered to help Temujin. He pledged 20,000 of his best warriors to the cause, and thus Temujin readied for revenge. He now had a small army under his control. This was likely enough to defeat the band of Merkits that attacked his camp. After all, they numbered only around 300. However, the Merkit tribe was made up of a confederation of 3 tribes, and together were one of the largest tribes in the steppes. Temujin didn't know if the band that had stolen his wife had joined up with the others. If they had, there could be tens of thousands of enemies waiting for him. And thus, Togrul and Temujin appealed to his blood brother Jamusha for help, and he too committed 20,000 warriors to the cause. But he did it very reluctantly, and we'd later find out why. The Merkit tribe's home was a region to the north of Mongolia that borders modern-day Russia. But as these are nomads, they never stayed in one place for long, and finding them wasn't going to be easy. Temujin and his horde roamed the northern steppes, searching for the band of Merkits that had Borte. Since the Merkits were hated by most of the Mongol tribes, Temujin could have gathered even more men to his cause. However, he wanted to act with stealth. Because he didn't know just how many enemies awaited him, he did his best to keep news of his attack quiet. This slowed down their progress, and they went months and months without finding any signs of where his wife could be. During this time, he and his blood brother Jamuka started to clash. They often bumped heads about who was leading the force. A rivalry was brewing. And then, just when they thought they'd never locate their enemies, they found them. News reached Temujin that Borte was being held in a camp at a basin where 2 rivers met. This is said to have been in the year 1191. Temujin, Togrul, and Jamuka planned their attack. They had them cornered. And they also had the element of surprise. They greatly outnumbered the Merkits and decided this wouldn't just be an attack to get Borte back. It was their chance to wipe out the Merkits once and for all. Hence, they attacked from the northwest late one night. However, a fisherman had seen them approaching from upriver and was able to warn the Merkits. This saved their tribe from complete annihilation. Temujin's alliance charged the Merkit Confederation and quickly overran them. Most of the Merkits had already started fleeing after the fisherman's warning. They completely overran them, and amidst the chaos, Temujin tried to find Borte. Was she dead? Had they fled with her? He wasn't sure. He charged into the mob of fleeing Merkits and screamed her name. Borte was nowhere to be seen. He hacked down enemies while he called for her. But as the battle went on, the chances of finding her became slimmer and slimmer, until, by some miracle, she heard his voice. She was amongst the fleeing Merkits, on the back of a horseback, but when she heard her real husband's voice, she jumped off and plunged back into the chaos to find him. It was dark, and the moon was the only source of light. But his voice penetrated the night, and she went towards it. And then she saw his horse, and recognizing its reins, she grabbed them. Temujin looked down and saw her standing beneath his horse. He'd won. After they finished scattering the Merkit tribe, they celebrated. Borte fell into his arms, and he and his fellow warriors reveled in their victory. However, something wasn't right. Borte was pregnant. Whispers started and rumors spread. She had spent around 8 months with the Merkits, so was it Temujin's child? Or her Merkit husband's? Nobody could know for sure, but Temujin didn't care. When his new son was born, he named him Jochi and declared that he was his and would be treated as such. Although not everybody was convinced that was that. And thus, shortly after their victory, Temujin and Jamuka reforged their blood pact, and everything seemed fine. On the surface anyway. However, deep down, Jamuka was worried. Temujin was becoming more and more powerful and more power-hungry. He was not wrong, as after this victory, Temujin started to believe he could become more than just a warlord, more than just the man who would reunite his scattered tribe and bring honor back to his bloodline. Maybe he could become the ruler of the entire steppes, a feat no other Khan had achieved. While he planned his conquests, Jamuka planned his downfall. He sneakily met up with the remainder of the Merkit forces and made a secret alliance. After the battle, news of Temujin's victory spread, and more warriors flocked to him. He won many more battles, and his fame grew and grew. Shamans were prophesying he would be a great conqueror, and his followers were claiming he would be the Khan of all the Mongols. Togrul was happy with his prodigy's ascent, but Jamuka started plotting his downfall, and soon they would clash, and Temujin and the outcome of the battle changed the steppes' history forever, and also resulted in Temujin becoming a slave to the Chinese. But that's a story for next time. If you like this video, please check out the other parts of our Genghis Khan series.